The starship Aurora Dawn descended through the thick atmosphere of Zetherian 7, its sleek metallic frame gleaming faintly under the light of two suns that hung low in the sky. The planet below was a wild expanse of untamed wilderness, with jagged mountains rising like broken teeth against the horizon, and dense jungles stretching as far as the eye could see. This was uncharted territory, a place where no human had dared to venture before. Not because it wasn't worth exploring, but because it was home to creatures so fearsome they were whispered about in legends across the galaxy. Captain Ryan Carter stood at the helm of the ship, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the vessel toward the designated landing zone. His face was calm, though anyone who knew him well would have seen the flicker of unease in his eyes. Ryan was a seasoned explorer, someone who had faced danger countless times without flinching. But this mission felt different. There was something about Zetherian 7 that unsettled even the bravest souls. Behind him, Dr. Laura Bennett adjusted her glasses nervously, her gaze fixed on the monitors displaying data from the planet's surface. She was a brilliant scientist, known for her groundbreaking work in xenobiology, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping up her spine. Beside her, the rest of the team, engineers, biologists, and security personnel, worked quietly, their movements precise but tense. Everyone knew what awaited them down there, the Vrax. The creature was an apex predator, a monstrosity of evolution that struck terror into anyone who heard its name. Standing over 20 feet tall, covered in armored scales and equipped with claws sharp enough to slice through steel, the Vrax was the stuff of nightmares. Its golden eyes glowed with an intelligence that made it all the more terrifying. It wasn't just a mindless beast, it was cunning, calculating, and utterly merciless. No one who had ever encountered a Vrax had lived to tell the tale. And yet, here they were, preparing to step foot onto its territory. As the ship touched down gently on the soft earth, Ryan took a deep breath and turned to address the team. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice firm but reassuring. "We've trained for this, stick to the plan, stay alert, and remember, we're here to observe, not provoke. Let's make history." The crew nodded silently, each person steeling themselves for what lay ahead. One by one, they filed out of the ship, their boots crunching softly against the alien soil. The air smelled strange, a mix of damp vegetation and something metallic that clung to the back of their throats. Above them, the twin suns cast long shadows across the landscape, giving everything an eerie glow. Ryan led the way, his rifle slung over his shoulder but ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Behind him, Laura carried a scanner, her fingers flying over the device as it collected readings from the environment. The others spread out slightly, forming a loose perimeter around the group. They moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the dense foliage for any sign of movement. For the first few minutes, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The only sounds were the rustling leaves stirred by a gentle breeze and the occasional chirp of some distant insect-like creature. But then, as they ventured deeper into the jungle, the ground began to tremble faintly beneath their feet. At first it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but soon it grew stronger, more insistent. "Something's coming," whispered one of the security officers, his hand tightening around his weapon. Ryan held up a hand, signaling for silence. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. Through the trees they saw it, a massive form moving with predatory grace. The Vrax emerged slowly, stepping into a patch of sunlight that illuminated its grotesque beauty. Its scales shimmered like molten gold, and its claws glinted menacingly as it raised its head to inspect the intruders. Time seemed to stop. Every member of the team stood frozen, their instincts screaming at them to run, but running would mean certain death. Instead, they waited, holding their collective breath as the creature locked its glowing eyes onto Ryan. Ryan didn't move. He couldn't explain why, but something inside him told him not to reach for his rifle or shout orders to retreat. Instead, he did the last thing anyone expected. He stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and extended it toward the Vrax. "Ryan, what are you doing?" Laura hissed, panic evident in her voice. But Ryan ignored her. He kept his focus entirely on the creature, his expression calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. When he was close enough, he reached out and placed his palm gently against the Vrax's snout. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the creature lowered its head and let out a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. It sounded almost like contentment. Laura stared, dumbfounded, unable to process what she was seeing. The others exchanged bewildered glances, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or prepare for an ambush. But the Vrax didn't attack. If anything, it seemed relaxed, its posture less threatening than it had been moments ago. Ryan pulled his hand back slowly, his heart racing but his mind clear. "I think it's okay," he said softly, turning to face the team. "I think we can trust it." Trust. That was a word no one had ever associated with the Vrax. Yet, standing there amidst the alien jungle, surrounded by fear and uncertainty, Ryan had done the impossible. He had bridged the gap between man and monster with nothing more than a simple gesture of kindness. Little did he know this moment would change everything, for him, for humanity, and for the entire galaxy. The jungle was eerily silent after the Vrax's unexpected reaction. The team stood frozen, their eyes darting between Ryan and the massive creature that loomed over them. Laura's mouth hung open slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. Her mind raced with questions. How could this be possible? Why hadn't the Vrax attacked? Was it really responding to Ryan's touch? Ryan, on the other hand, seemed oddly calm. He didn't fully understand why he'd done what he did, but something deep inside him told him it was the right move. As he looked at the golden-eyed beast before him, he felt a strange sense of connection. It wasn't fear or aggression radiating from the creature. It was curiosity. The Vrax tilted its head slightly, studying Ryan as if trying to figure him out. "Okay," Ryan said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, though his heart still pounded in his chest. "Let's not make any sudden moves." "No," one argued. Slowly, Ryan took a step back, keeping his hands visible and his movements deliberate. To everyone's amazement, the Vrax didn't lunge or growl. Instead, it remained still, watching him intently. Its glowing eyes followed every motion, but there was no sign of hostility. If anything, it almost seemed calm. Laura finally found her voice. "Ryan?" she whispered, her tone a mix of awe and disbelief. "What? How did you know to do that?" "I didn't," Ryan admitted, glancing over his shoulder at her. "I just acted on instinct. I don't know why, but I felt like it wouldn't hurt me. Instinct. That was all it was, a gut feeling, a hunch born out of some unexplainable impulse. But instincts weren't usually enough to save someone from certain death, especially when facing a creature as deadly as the Vrax. Yet here they were, alive and unharmed, staring into the face of an apex predator that had spared their lives. The security officers exchanged uneasy looks. Their training had prepared them for combat, not diplomacy. None of them had ever imagined they'd find themselves standing so close to a Vrax without firing a single shot. One of them, a burly man named Marcus, muttered under his breath, "This is insane." Ryan ignored the comment. He turned his attention back to the creature, taking another cautious step forward. This time, he extended both hands slowly, palms facing outward in a gesture of peace. The Vrax watched him closely, its massive body shifting slightly as if deciding whether to trust him further. Then, to everyone's shock, it lowered its head again, nudging Ryan's hand gently with its snout. A collective gasp rippled through the group. No one dared to breathe too loudly, afraid that even the slightest sound might shatter the fragile moment. Ryan smiled faintly, his fingers brushing lightly against the creature's armored scales. They were warm to the touch, surprisingly smooth despite their rugged appearance. "We need to document this," Laura said suddenly, her scientific instincts kicking in. She fumbled with her scanner, pointing it toward the Vrax. "This is unprecedented. We're witnessing behavior we've never seen before." Ryan nodded, though his focus remained on the creature. Careful, he warned softly. Don't get too close. Laura hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She stayed where she was, keeping a safe distance while recording data furiously. The others began to relax slightly, lowering their weapons, cautiously. They weren't entirely convinced the Vrax wouldn't turn on them, but for now it seemed content to let Ryan approach. As the minutes passed, the tension in the air eased. The Vrax continued to interact with Ryan, occasionally letting out soft rumbles that sounded almost like purrs. It was surreal, watching such a fearsome beast behave so docilely. The team couldn't help but marvel at the sight, their initial terror giving way to fascination. Eventually, Ryan decided to test the limits of this newfound bond. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small piece of dried fruit, one of the snacks he'd brought along for energy during the mission. Holding it carefully in his palm, he offered it to the Vrax. The creature sniffed at it curiously, its nostrils flaring as it analyzed the unfamiliar scent. After a moment, it opened its massive jaws and delicately plucked the fruit from Ryan's hand. Everyone held their breath as the Vrax chewed slowly, its sharp teeth crunching the snack into tiny pieces. When it swallowed, it gave another low rumble, this one sounding almost satisfied. Ryan grinned, feeling a surge of triumph. Looks like we've got ourselves a friend, he said, glancing back at the team. Laura shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe this is happening. A Vrax, an actual Vrax, is eating food from your hand. Do you realize how impossible this is? Ryan chuckled, though his expression remained serious. Yeah, I get it. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. But whatever this is, we need to make the most of it. This could change everything. He was right. The implications of what they were witnessing were staggering. For decades, the Galactic Council had classified the Vrax as untamable, a species too dangerous to coexist with. Entire planets had been evacuated because of these creatures, their populations decimated by attacks that left no survivors. And yet here was Ryan Carter, a simple human explorer, forging a connection with one of the galaxy's deadliest predators. Over the next hour, the team set up camp nearby, careful not to stray too far from the Vrax. They kept their equipment running, documenting every interaction between Ryan and the creature. Laura took countless scans, analyzing everything from the Vrax's body temperature to the frequency of its vocalizations. Meanwhile, Ryan continued to engage with the beast, offering more snacks and speaking to it in soothing tones. By the time night fell, the Vrax had settled down near the edge of the clearing, lying on the ground with its massive body curled loosely. Ryan sat cross-legged beside it, leaning against its side as if it were a giant scaly pillow. The rest of the team gathered around a small fire, discussing the day's events in hushed voices. This changes things, Marcus said finally, breaking the quiet. If word gets out about this, people won't believe it. They'll have to, Laura replied firmly. We have the evidence right here, videos, scans, recordings, everything. This isn't just a story. It's proof that the Vrax aren't mindless killers. There's intelligence behind those eyes. And kindness, Ryan added, looking over at the sleeping creature. Whatever drove it to attack in the past, it doesn't seem to apply to us, not anymore at least. The conversation drifted off as exhaustion set in. One by one, the team members retreated to their tents, leaving Ryan alone with the Vrax. He stayed awake for a while longer, gazing up at the twin moons that bathed the jungle in silver light. Despite the danger they faced, he felt strangely at peace. Something about the Vrax's presence was comforting, almost protective. Before drifting off to sleep, Ryan made a decision. Whatever lay ahead, he would do everything in his power to protect this newfound friendship. Whether it was for humanity, for science, or simply for the sake of understanding, he knew this bond was worth fighting for. Little did he know, the galaxy was already watching, and not everyone would see his actions as heroic. The next morning, the jungle awoke with a symphony of alien sounds. Birds with iridescent feathers chirped from the treetops, while strange insect-like creatures buzzed around the campsite. The air was thick with humidity, and the twin suns cast long shadows across the clearing. Ryan stirred awake, his back stiff from sleeping against the Vrax's side. He blinked groggily, taking in the sight of the massive creature still lying beside him, its chest rising and falling steadily as it slept. For a moment, Ryan allowed himself to marvel at how far they'd come in such a short time. Just yesterday, this same beast would have been seen as an unstoppable force of destruction, a predator that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who dared set foot on Zytherian 7. Now it was something else, something more. It wasn't just an apex predator anymore. It was intelligent, curious, and, dare he say it, friendly. Ryan sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping Vrax. He glanced over at the rest of the team who were beginning to emerge from their tents. Laura was already fiddling with her scanner, her eyes lighting up as she reviewed the data collected overnight. Marcus and the other security officers stood nearby, their weapons slung over their shoulders but ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Despite the events of the previous day, none of them seemed entirely comfortable being so close to the creature. "Morning," Ryan said softly, stretching his arms above his head. "Sleep well?" Laura looked up from her device and smiled faintly, as well as one can when sharing a campsite with a 20-foot-tall monster. "How about you? Did you manage to get any rest leaning against that?" Ryan chuckled. "Better than I expected, actually. It's surprisingly warm, kind of like having a giant space heater." The joke fell flat, earning only awkward smiles from the others. No one was quite ready to joke about the Vrax. Not yet, anyway. But Ryan didn't. And he understood their hesitation. What had happened between him and the creature was unprecedented, and it would take time for everyone to adjust. As the team gathered around the fire for breakfast, Ryan decided to try something new. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out another piece of dried fruit, holding it cautiously in his hand. The Vrax stirred slightly, its golden eyes flickering open as it sensed movement nearby. When it saw Ryan offering the snack, it let out a low rumble and lifted its head, nudging his hand gently with its snout. "See?" Ryan said, smiling as he handed over the treat. "It's almost like training a dog, except this one could probably eat a dog in 2 bites." No one laughed this time. Instead, they watched silently as the Vrax chewed the fruit, its sharp teeth making quick work of the snack. Laura leaned closer, her scanner humming softly as she recorded the interaction. "This is incredible," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "Its behavior is completely different from anything we've observed before. It's almost like it trusts you." "I think it does," Ryan replied, scratching the base of the Vrax's neck lightly. To his surprise, the creature leaned into the touch, letting out a sound that resembled a deep, contented purr. "And I think we can use that trust to learn more about it. Maybe even communicate." The idea sparked excitement among the team. Though it was tempered by caution, communicating with an alien species, especially one as dangerous as the Vrax, was no small feat. But if anyone could pull it off, it was Laura. She spent the next several hours analyzing the scans, searching for patterns in the Vrax's vocalizations and movements. Meanwhile, Ryan continued to interact with the creature, testing its reactions to different gestures and sounds. By midday, they had made significant progress. Laura discovered that the Vrax emitted subsonic frequencies when it rumbled, vibrations that were too low for human ears to detect without specialized equipment. These frequencies varied depending on the situation, suggesting they might serve as a form of communication. Excited by the discovery, she began working on a rudimentary translator, piecing together possible meanings based on context. While Laura focused on science, Ryan focused on building rapport. He gave the Vrax a name, Grizz, inspired by its bear-like demeanor when it wasn't hunting. Grizz seemed to respond positively to the name, tilting its head whenever Ryan said it. Over time, the bond between man and beast grew stronger, to the point where Grizz would follow Ryan around the clearing like a loyal companion. But not everyone was convinced this newfound friendship was a good thing. Back on Earth, or rather, aboard the Galactic Council's orbital headquarters, The news of Ryan's actions had spread quickly. Video footage captured by the team's drones had been transmitted back to the council, sparking heated debates among its members. Some praised Ryan's bravery, hailing him as a pioneer in interspecies relations. Others condemned his recklessness, arguing that befriending a Vrax was a violation of every protocol ever written. Counselor Samuel Drake was among the loudest critics. A stern-faced man with a reputation for being overly cautious, Drake slammed his fist onto the table during an emergency session. "This is madness," he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Captain Carter has endangered not only himself but the entire mission. The Vrax are wild animals incapable of reason or restraint. What happens when it turns on him? Or worse, what happens when it decides the rest of humanity looks just as tasty?" Ambassador Clara West, a calm and composed woman seated across from Drake, raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Counselor, perhaps we should reserve judgment until we have more information. Captain Carter's actions may seem unorthodox, but they've yielded results we never thought possible. If there's even a chance of peaceful coexistence with the Vrax, shouldn't we explore it?" Drake scoffed. "Peaceful coexistence? With a creature that has slaughtered entire colonies? You're dreaming, Ambassador." Clara remained unfazed. "Dreams often lead to breakthroughs, Counselor. Perhaps it's time we stopped seeing the Vrax as monsters and started seeing them as potential allies. After all, isn't that what exploration is about? Discovering new possibilities?" The debate raged on, dividing the council into factions. In the end, it was decided that a diplomat would be sent to Zetherian 7 to observe the situation firsthand. Clara volunteered herself for the task, accompanied by her assistant, Ethan Cole, a young man with a knack for problem-solving. Together, they prepared for the journey, determined to uncover the truth behind Ryan's extraordinary bond with the Vrax. Meanwhile, back on the planet, Ryan and his team remained blissfully unaware of the controversy brewing light years away. They were too focused on their work, too captivated by the wonders unfolding before their eyes. Each day brought new discoveries, new insights into the nature of the Vrax. And with each passing hour, Ryan's connection with Grizz grew deeper, stronger, and more inexplicable. One evening, as the twin moons bathed the jungle in silvery light, Ryan sat beside Grizz, staring up at the stars. "You know," he said softly, speaking more to himself than to the creature, "I don't think anyone back home will understand this. They'll call me crazy, reckless, maybe even dangerous. But I know there's something special about you, Grizz, something worth protecting." Grizz let out a low rumble, resting its massive head on the ground beside Ryan. Whether it understood his words or simply enjoyed his company, Ryan couldn't say. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the bond they shared, a bond that defied logic, challenged assumptions, and hinted at a future few could have imagined. Little did Ryan know that future was closer than he realized, and it would test everything he believed in. The arrival of Ambassador Clara West and her assistant Ethan Cole marked a turning point for the team on Zetherian 7. Their shuttle descended through the thick atmosphere, its sleek frame cutting through the clouds before touching down near the campsite. Ryan and his crew watched as the hatch opened, revealing Clara's composed figure stepping out onto the alien soil. She was dressed in formal attire, a sharp contrast to the rugged outfits worn by the explorers, and carried herself with an air of authority that demanded respect. Ethan followed closely behind her, adjusting his glasses nervously as he took in the surroundings. Unlike Clara, who seemed unfazed by the dense jungle and looming shadows, Ethan looked visibly uneasy. His eyes darted around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. He had read the reports about the Vrax and knew their reputation all too well. Despite Ryan's claims of friendship, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just beyond sight. "Welcome to Zetherian 7, Ryan said, stepping forward to greet them. His tone was polite but guarded. He wasn't sure what to expect from these visitors, especially given the heated debates raging within the Galactic Council. "We weren't expecting company so soon." Clara smiled faintly, though her expression remained professional. "Thank you, Captain Carter. The Council felt it necessary to send someone to observe the situation firsthand. Given the unusual nature of your interactions with the Vracs, we need to ensure everything is proceeding safely. Ryan nodded, understanding the subtext of her words. Understood. If you'd like, I can introduce you to Grizz. Grizz? Clara repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's what you've named it. It suits him, Ryan replied, simply shrugging. You'll see why when you meet him. Before Clara could respond, a low rumble echoed through the clearing. Everyone turned to see the massive form of the Vracs emerging from the edge of the jungle. Grizz moved with slow, deliberate steps, his golden eyes locking onto the newcomers. Ethan instinctively stepped back, his hand brushing against the weapon at his side. Even Clara stiffened slightly, though she managed to maintain her composure. Ryan held up a hand, signaling for calm. It's okay, he said softly. He's not going to hurt anyone. To prove his point, Ryan approached Grizz confidently, placing a gentle hand on the creature's snout. Grizz lowered his head, letting out another deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. To everyone's surprise, he then nudged Ryan playfully, almost like a pet seeking attention. Clara stared, momentarily speechless. She had seen the footage transmitted by the team, but witnessing this interaction in person was something else entirely. It was one thing to watch videos of a human befriending a Vracs. It was another to stand mere feet away from the towering beast and see how docile it appeared under Ryan's care. Well, Clara said finally, breaking the silence. This is certainly unexpected. Ryan grinned, patting Grizz's side affectionately. Told you he'd grow on you. Clara didn't return the smile, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Perhaps, but let's not jump to conclusions just yet. We still have much to learn about this creature and about your connection with it. Over the next few days, Clara and Ethan immersed themselves in the team's work. Laura eagerly shared her findings, explaining the subsonic frequencies emitted by the Vracs and how they might serve as a form of communication. Clara listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated both her intelligence and skepticism. Ethan, meanwhile, spent most of his time observing Ryan's interactions with Grizz, taking detailed notes and occasionally snapping photos. Despite her outward professionalism, Clara couldn't deny the growing sense of wonder she felt. Watching. Ryan engage with Grizz was unlike anything she had ever experienced. There was an undeniable bond between them, one that transcended species and defied logic. Grizz responded to Ryan's gestures with surprising gentleness, even allowing Clara to approach cautiously during one particularly calm moment. I don't understand it, Ethan admitted one evening as they sat around the campfire. How is this possible? Everything we know about the Vracs says they're mindless killing machines, but this is something else entirely. That's why we're here, Clara replied, her gaze fixed on the flames. To find out if what we know is wrong or incomplete. Her words hung in the air unanswered. The truth was, no one really understood what was happening. Not fully, but the implications were staggering. If Ryan's bond with Grizz could be replicated, if humans could truly communicate with the Vracs, it would change everything. Wars could be avoided, alliances formed, and entire worlds saved from destruction. However, not everyone shared Clara's optimism. Back on the council, tensions continued to rise. Samuel Drake led the opposition, arguing that Ryan's actions posed a grave risk to humanity. What happens when the Vracs turns on him? Drake demanded during another heated session. Or worse, what happens when it sees us as weak and decides to attack our colonies? This isn't diplomacy, it's recklessness. His arguments struck a chord with many council members who feared the potential consequences of trusting such a dangerous species. Others, however, sided with Clara, believing that Ryan's discovery represented an opportunity too important to ignore. The debate grew fiercer, dividing the council into opposing factions. Meanwhile, on Zetherian 7, the team faced challenges of their own. One afternoon, while conducting routine scans, Laura noticed something unusual. Grizz had grown increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth near the edge of the clearing. His golden eyes glowed brighter than usual and his rumbles carried a sharper edge. What's wrong with him? Marcus asked, gripping his rifle tightly. I'm not sure, Laura replied, frowning as she checked her scanner. But whatever it is, it's making him restless. We should keep our distance until we figure it out. Ryan disagreed. No, he said firmly. If something's bothering him, we need to find out why. Ignoring it won't help. Against Laura's protests, Ryan approached Grizz cautiously. The Vrac stopped pacing and turned to face him, its massive body tense with energy. For a moment, Ryan hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Then, remembering their earlier interactions, he extended his hand slowly, palm facing upward. Grizz sniffed at his hand, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Instead of retreating, Ryan moved closer, speaking in soft, soothing tones. It's okay, big guy. Whatever's wrong, we'll figure it out together. To everyone's relief, Grizz relaxed, slightly, leaning into Ryan's touch. But the tension in the air remained palpable. Something was clearly troubling the creature, though no one could pinpoint the cause. Later that evening, Clara pulled Ryan aside for a private conversation. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice low but serious. Do you trust this creature? Truly trust it? Ryan didn't hesitate. Yes, with my life. Clara studied him carefully, searching for any hint of doubt. When she found none, she nodded. Then perhaps it's time we trusted you as well. Because if this works, if we can truly build a bridge between humans and Vracs, it could change the galaxy forever. Her words resonated deeply with Ryan. He had always believed in the importance of exploration and understanding, but now he realized just how far-reaching the impact of his actions might be. Whether it was for better or worse, only time would tell. As night fell over the jungle, Ryan sat beside Grizz once more, staring up at the twin moons. The Vracs rested quietly beside him, its presence both comforting and humbling. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Ryan knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't face them alone. Together, he and Grizz had forged a bond that defied odds and inspired hope. A bond that might just reshape the future of two species. Little did Ryan know, the hardest tests were yet to come. The days passed quickly as Clara and Ethan settled into the rhythm of life on Zetherian 7. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping birds, buzzing insects, and the occasional distant roar of unknown creatures, but none of them compared to the low rumbles of Grizz, the Vracs who had become the center of everyone's attention. Clara observed everything with a sharp eye, taking notes and asking questions that often left the team pausing to think. Ethan, on the other hand, remained cautious, his hand rarely straying far from the weapon at his side. Ryan continued to spend most of his time with Grizz, deepening their bond through small gestures and shared moments. He'd bring snacks, speak softly, and occasionally scratch behind the creature's armored plates, earning contented rumbles in return. To Clara, it was both fascinating and unsettling. She couldn't deny the connection between Ryan and Grizz, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that something unpredictable could happen at any moment. One morning, as the twin suns rose, over the horizon casting long shadows across the clearing, the team gathered for a meeting. Clara stood at the center, her posture straight and her expression serious. We need to push further, she said, addressing the group. Understanding Grizz is important, but we're here to learn about the Vracs as a species. If this bond is real and replicable, we need to see how far it can go. Ryan nodded, though he felt a pang of unease. What do you have in mind? Clara glanced at Laura, who had been working tirelessly on the subsonic translator. Laura's device is almost ready. Once we can interpret Grizz's vocalizations, we might be able to communicate more directly. But first, we need to test his reactions to new stimuli, things that mimic real-world scenarios. What kind of scenarios? Marcus asked, frowning. Things like unfamiliar sounds, objects, or even other humans approaching him, Clara explained. We need to know if Grizz will remain calm when faced with situations outside his comfort zone. Ryan hesitated. He trusted Grizz, but he also knew the Virax was still a wild animal at heart. Pushing too hard, too fast, could backfire. Let's take it slow, he suggested. Grizz has shown incredible patience, but we don't want to Overwhelm him, Clara agreed, though her tone made it clear she wasn't willing to wait indefinitely. Agreed. But we can't afford to stall either. The council expects results. With that, the team set to work. Over the next few hours, they conducted a series of controlled experiments. They played recordings of loud noises, thunderstorms, explosions, and even the screeches of other alien creatures to gauge Grizz's reaction. To everyone's relief, the Vrax remained calm, tilting his head curiously but showing no signs of aggression. Next, they introduced unfamiliar objects, a drone, a glowing orb, and a metallic box, and watched as Grizz sniffed and nudged them cautiously. He's smart, Laura remarked, jotting down notes furiously. He knows these things aren't threats. But the final test proved more challenging. Clara herself approached Grizz, standing several feet away and holding out her hand. Her movements were slow and deliberate, mimicking Ryan's earlier interactions. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Grizz let out a low growl, his golden eyes narrowing slightly. Everyone froze. Ryan stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Clara and the Vrax. "It's okay," he said softly, raising his hands. "Easy, Grizz." To Clara's credit, she didn't flinch. Instead, she held her ground, her gaze steady despite the tension in the air. After what felt like an eternity, Grizz relaxed, lowering his head and letting out a softer rumble. He didn't approach Clara, but he didn't retreat either. It was progress, however small. "Well done," Clara said once the situation had calmed. "That was enlightening." Ryan exhaled slowly, relieved that nothing had gone wrong. "Grizz is protective of me," he explained. "He doesn't trust easily, but he's learning." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "Which is why we need to keep pushing. We've seen what he's capable of, but we need to understand his limits." Despite the day's success, tensions began to rise within the group. Some members of the team, particularly Marcus and a few of the security officers, grew increasingly uneasy. They respected Ryan's bravery, but they couldn't ignore the risks involved. "This is all fine and good," Marcus muttered during dinner that evening. "But what happens when something goes wrong? What happens when Grizz decides we're not worth the trouble?" Ryan frowned, frustration creeping into his voice. "Nothing's going to go wrong, Marcus. You just have to trust me." "Trust you?" Marcus shot back, his tone sharp. "Ryan, this isn't some pet project. This is a Vrax, a creature that's killed thousands of people. I'm not saying you're wrong, but we can't afford to get complacent." The argument ended there, but the unease lingered. Even Clara noticed the growing divide within the team. She pulled Ethan aside later that night, her brow furrowed with concern. "We're walking a fine line here," she admitted. "If we push too hard, we risk losing everything. But if we don't push at all, we'll never know what's possible." Ethan nodded, though his expression was troubled. "Do you think Ryan realizes how dangerous this is? Not just for him, but for all of us?" "I think he does," Clara replied. "But I also think he believes in this bond more than anything else. And maybe he's right." The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. As the team prepared for another round of tests, Laura's scanner picked up unusual activity in the jungle. A faint vibration rippled through the ground, accompanied by the sound of snapping branches and heavy footsteps. Everyone turned toward the trees, their hearts pounding. "It's not Grizz," Laura whispered, her voice tight with fear. "There's something else out there." Ryan stepped forward, his rifle slung over his shoulder but ready to be drawn. "Stay close," he ordered, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Moments later, a second Vrax emerged from the shadows. Unlike Grizz, this one was smaller but no less intimidating, its scales gleaming menacingly in the sunlight. Its golden eyes locked onto the group, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. Panic rippled through the team. Weapons were raised. Fingers hovered over triggers and voices shouted conflicting orders. But Ryan didn't move. Instead, he turned to Grizz, who had positioned himself protectively in front of the group. "Grizz," Ryan said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's okay. Stand down." To everyone's astonishment, Grizz obeyed. He lowered his head slightly, letting out a rumble that seemed to resonate with the newcomer. The second, Vrax paused, its posture shifting from aggressive to cautious. For a tense moment, the two creatures stared at each other, neither advancing nor retreating. Then, without warning, the newcomer turned and disappeared back into the jungle, its massive form vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The team exhaled collectively, their bodies sagging with relief. "What just happened?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "I think Grizz just saved us," Ryan replied, his eyes wide with awe. He recognized the other Vrax as a threat, but instead of attacking, he diffused the situation. Clara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "This changes everything," she said finally. "If Grizz can communicate with others of his kind, and if they respond to him, it means we're dealing with a level of intelligence far beyond what we assumed." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. The bond between Ryan and Grizz wasn't just a personal connection, it was a key to unlocking a deeper understanding of the Vrax as a species. But with that understanding came responsibility and danger. As night fell, the team sat around the fire, discussing the day's events in hushed tones. Ryan gazed into the flames, his thoughts swirling. He had always believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence, but now he realized just how fragile that possibility was. One misstep, one wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. Little did he know, the galaxy was already watching, and not everyone was pleased. Far away, aboard a Krylos Empire warship, leaders plotted their next move. They had seen the footage of Ryan and Grizz, and they viewed the bond as a threat to their dominance. To them, the idea of humans allying with the Vrax was unacceptable, and so plans were set into motion, plans that would bring violence and chaos to the quiet jungle of Zetherian 7. For Ryan and his team, the hardest battles were yet to come.